I would like to welcome you to today's webinar, Servant Leadership. Check your ego at the door. My name is Arlene Itori and I'm a webinar coordinator for the Outsourcing Institute. I'll be working in the background to help answer any technical or general questions that you may have. We encourage you at any time during the presentation to submit your questions to today's speaker. To do this, click on the questions box, type your question in the space provided, and click on the Submit button. Today's webinar is being recorded. You will be receiving a follow-up email in approximately 2 days, which will include a link with today's recorded webinar and presentation slides. So without further ado, I will now turn it over to our moderator, Frank Casal, founder and CEO of the Outsourcing Institute, for the formal introduction of today's speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Arlene, and good day, everyone. We have a very interesting topic to address today. While we here at the Outsourcing Institute typically address outsourcing-specific topics, to change things up a bit here, we're going to be talking about something that is of interest and in many cases, many would say lacking just in the corporate world in general, which is leadership and certainly innovative, fresh new approaches and ways to look at improving leadership. So I was intrigued by this topic. Even the title, when I first heard it, caught my attention, and taking a quick skim at the slides recently, I see that we have a great presentation. Another thing I wanted to mention that Julie Silbar, who I will be introducing momentarily and passing the baton to, will be presenting at an upcoming conference, and that's kind of where we discovered her, if you will. So if you will be attending that conference, excuse me, bear with me, my allergies are killing me today, then you'll be able to actually meet with Julie and hear a more expanded presentation. Today we're going to get really down and dirty, talk excerpts, if you will, and ideally interact with the audience that's here. We have a good turnout. And for those of you who've been to our webinars before, you know we do our best to interact with those in attendance. Julie is the VP of Hospitality Systems and Central Reservations at Red Lion Hotel Corporation, so she's a practitioner. This is what she kind of lives and does on a day-in and day-out basis, so I'm looking forward to hearing her story. And again, as I would mention that if you haven't been to our webinars before, if you have a question, no need to wait till the end. Send it. It will come directly to my desktop here, and I'll do my best to not interrupt Julie too often, but to, enough that we'll be able to address those questions as they come to mind. Here's just a quickie commercial for OI for those of you who are not members. We are basically at the center of the largest outsourcing professional network in the business. We have over 70,000 members. People typically come to us because we're a good aggregator of trends and best practices, case studies, if you will. We have a group here that does training. We have a pretty neat software product that we're just starting to roll out to the marketplace, which is our outsourcing RFP builder. If you're kind of in the career zone and looking for an outsourcing specific job, or if you're an executive looking to hire outsourcing specific talent, either on the buy side, practitioner side, if you will, or on the provider side. CMS, our sister company, has been doing that for many, many years. That's all they do. If virtual isn't the only thing that you do as far as getting access to information and you like to get local once in a while, well, we have several local roadshows planned in coming months, specifically New York, Houston, and Columbus this quarter. And Mexico City we're finalizing, and there are several others that we'll be announcing as we get into the first quarter of next year. Those are very localized, low-cost, convenient, one-day gatherings. Excuse me, and just a little bit more here on our road shows. I guess the simple thing to say is go to outsourcing.com/roadshow, and if you happen to be based in any of those cities or happen to be traveling to any of those cities, we'd love to have you join us. Thank you, Arlene. So, Julie, without much further ado, let me pass the baton to you, and I'll be here to address questions throughout and on the back end. And again, thank you for investing the time.
No No, thank you very much, Frank, and thank you, Arlene, for the introduction. Hello, everybody. I'm actually in the Pacific time zone, so I'm still in the morning. And just to give you a little background, I have been working in the contact center industry for about 18 years, so it's been a while. So I'm in that world, and we have actually recently, well, in the last couple of years, outsourced our call center. While it is still located in our corporate city of Spokane, Washington, we do have an outsourced call center. So I'm kind of very familiar with what Frank and team do, and also very familiar with the contact center world, specifically with central reservations for hospitality, for hotels. And that's my life, is travel and the travel industry. So my other life is leadership. I have a complete passion for leadership. Love it. Love everything about it. Love to talk about it with other people. Love to read about it. Love to watch movies about it. I'm a sports fanatic, so I learn from coaches and managers, and I watch how sports teams handle their leadership, and there's some great knowledge to be gained there. So movie and sports enthusiast, which I think some people don't realize that leadership is all-encompassing in some of those things. So what I want to talk about today is servant leadership, and it's not a new concept to the world of leadership. It may be a new concept to you, or you might have heard it in passing. But basically, servant leadership, it sometimes gives a negative connotation. In fact, when I first started my studies of leadership to working on my master's degree, I saw the class and I thought, oh my goodness, this does not sound fun. I don't want to be a servant to somebody else. And then I started really reading into what it is all about. And I have a certificate in servant leadership because I became completely passionate about it. And it is a ton of fun once you really start learning about it. And that's what I'm kind of hoping to give you a taste of today. So there are a couple foremost leaders on servant leadership in the world. One of them is Robert Greenleaf, and the other one is Larry Spears. There are a few others that I'll refer to today. Even Jim Collins, for those of you who have read Good to Great, he talks about servant leadership a little bit. And Robert Greenleaf has this wonderful quote. He has a ton of wonderful quotes, but the servant leader is servant first. It begins with the natural feeling that one wants to serve. Then conscious choice brings one to aspire to lead. The best test is, do those served grow as persons? Do they, while being served, become healthier, wiser, freer, more autonomous, more likely themselves to become servants? Now that sounds like a mouthful and almost like it's impossible, but it's really not as intimidating as you may think. And you might think, you know, the word servant and leadership really kind of create an oxymoron together, but it's actually a very, very strong leadership philosophy if you take out the immediate feeling or the immediate thought you get when you hear the word servant. It does not mean you're weak. It does not mean you're passive. In fact, on the contrary, being a servant leader, it takes a very, very strong, confident person. And the biggest thing that I want to focus on today is there's a couple of different characteristics of servant leadership, but mostly it does not include an ego. When you're a servant leader, there is really no ego involved. You can be confident, you can have some arrogance, but as far as ego goes, not really. So if we look at some characteristics of servant leadership, it's basically built on 10 of them: listening, empathy, healing, awareness, persuasion, conceptualization, foresight, stewardship, a commitment to the growth of people, and building a community. Some of these may seem very, very obvious. You may think that you have some of them, and you very well may have. You may apply them every day, whether it's work life or personal life. But we're going to look at a few of them individually and see if you're truly applying them as a servant leader would. I'm not going to look at every single one. I'm just going to pick out a few of my favorites and go through those and see if what can impact your leadership style the best with some of these characteristics. There's also a book out there called The 7 Pillars of Servant Leadership by James Sipe and Don Frick. And it's basically the same concepts. The 7 pillars, they have, there's a person of character, putting people first, a skilled communicator, compassionate collaborator, one who has foresight, a systems thinker, and the one who leads with moral authority. And if you kind of listen to those and then the 10 that are on your screen, there's a lot that go hand in hand. So they're very, very similar. So the idea behind servant leadership is, again, it's not a new thing. It's out there. It's been out there for a while. But I think a lot of people just kind of forget that there are different ways to lead than just what you're taught by maybe somebody who you kind of looked up to, but might not have the greatest leadership skills. Another way to look at servant leadership, if any of you have read the book Good to Great, it is a fabulous book. I'm sure a lot of you would agree. It's been around a while as well, but Jim Collins in his book calls this a level 5 executive. And basically what he says is that it builds enduring greatness through a paradoxical blend of personal humility and professional will. And in that book, his team actually does decide against using the term servant leadership, and they come up with this term level 5 executive because they don't think it has the negative or weak connotation that the term servant does. To me, these are completely interchangeable. I've read Good to Great a million times. I've read a ton of servant leadership books and other leadership books, and they're very, very interchangeable because Jim describes in his book level 5 executive as being humble, putting others first. I'm paraphrasing some of this, giving credit to others, not using the word I, being modest, being fearless, and those are all things that a servant leader will do as well. In fact, he quotes one of the CEOs that they do a study on with one of the companies, is describing one of his colleagues as a show horse while he himself is a plow horse. And if you think of that, in essence, that's what a servant leader is. A plow horse does the work for his owner, not for himself. And a show horse is just that. It's all for show, a lot of credit, where maybe credit shouldn't be taken by that show horse himself. Both can be learned. Again, I think they're interchangeable. I don't think you are really necessarily born one way or the other. If you want to, and if your ego allows you to become one or the other. And what I mean by that is some people just can't do the things that a servant leader would because their ego just kind of gets in their way, and it can be a real hindrance. For example, people who have a strong ego have a really, really hard time saying that they're wrong. They will not give credit, they take credit. And also, they don't listen effectively, and listening is a huge, huge key to being a good leader and being a good servant leader, or if you want, a level 5 executive. So let's talk about listening. Listening, I have quite a few little quotes here from people you probably recognize. Listening skills they go way beyond communication skills, but it is a huge part of communication. You need to listen receptively to what is being said and not said. Sometimes you can pick up more from a conversation by listening and listening to what is not being said by someone. This is, again, not just work life, but it can be applied to your personal life as well. Stephen Covey has a great quote of, "Only a true natural servant automatically responds to any problem by listening first. When one is a leader, this disposition causes one to be seen as a servant first." And then I just throw out some other little wonderful quotes that I find from now and then. We should never pretend to know what we don't know. We should not feel ashamed to ask and learn from people below. And we should listen carefully to the views of the cadres at the lowest level. Be a pupil before you become a teacher. Learn from the cadres at the lower levels before you issue orders. When one of your peers or subordinates, specifically people who work for you, come to you with an issue or concern, a suggestion, an idea, you need to ask yourself, are you truly listening, or have you already begun to think of your argument for or against it? If you're listening with your ego, you will form an opinion before they even get done talking. If you're listening with your conscience, you will actually listen and hear what they're saying, not form an opinion right away, and really gather all the facts before you answer or before you form an opinion. your first response, if they're bringing you an idea or asking you a question, probably shouldn't be no. In the end, the answer may be no. That might be a very natural thing once you've learned all the facts. But somebody who is a servant leader, their automatic answer should be either maybe or yes or let's look at more options. And they're always asking questions, gathering more information. What else do you need to know before you make a decision? As a servant leader, it doesn't mean you automatically are going to say yes to everything. You still are a leader, which means that they're looking to you for guidance and making the best decisions. But you can't make an informed decision without listening. So make sure that you listen carefully before you make a decision and you know all the facts. When we're talking about ego, there's a huge difference between ego and confidence. You can even throw arrogance in there if you want. And you may get a clear picture in your head. These are the two men that I think of when I think of the difference between ego and confidence. You have Abraham Lincoln and you have Adolf Hitler, two completely different leaders. If you've been around a leader who is full of ego, you can actually almost feel it when you're around them. And you can actually feel it when you're around somebody who's a servant leader as well. You might have somebody that pops into your head who is one or the other. Abraham Lincoln, for example, he led with confidence, purely. There was not a ton of ego involved. He was a true servant leader through and through. He served his country. He did what was best for his people, even though people didn't agree with it. But he had people around him who informed him. He listened to them. He listened to his conscience, and he made decisions based on that. That's really, really key, to rule with your conscience or lead with your conscience. Adolf Hitler, on the other hand, was the exact opposite. He ruled with his ego solely. He was completely arrogant. He was very self-serving. He had a lot of motivation that he touted that truly wasn't true, and he really just wanted to rule the way he wanted to rule. And he didn't listen to his people. He didn't listen to the people of his country, even, for the most part, which was detrimental to him. He did not rule with his conscience at all. And in fact, I think people could probably argue he didn't have a conscience. And I've had both kinds of CEOs that were this way. I've had very arrogant, egotistical CEOs in my life, or leaders in my life, and I've had some that are completely servant leaders who lead with their conscience. They listen to their constituents. They listen to their staff. They take everything into account before they make decisions. But at the end of the day, you know that you're being heard, and you know that you have a say. And those are the people that you actually want to work for, I would argue. I don't know a lot of people who want to work for somebody who doesn't necessarily listen, who knows that there's a huge ego involved. They want to have some sort of say and some sort of voice in what they do.
Julie, I have a question, if I may, if this is a good time.
Sure.
I'm curious, if you think of a typical organization and just the tendencies of possibly, let's say, people in the sales department versus people in the HR department versus people in the engineering department. I'm just picking those categories. I'm just picking those departments arbitrarily. Have you found that that there are different, that certain people, depending on kind of their DNA and what they do for a living, are better listeners, and I'm going to hopefully not get you in trouble here, right? And then others maybe tend to just typically not be good listeners, just based on their discipline, kind of what they're doing for a living?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there are certain areas that I would argue, or one could argue, that you just need to make decisions, and there's not a whole lot of listening involved. I would say, though, for the most part, as a leader, HR kind of comes to mind to people because you think, well, HR, you're supposed to listen, and that's your job, and so on and so forth. But if you take other departments, sales, for example, if you have a VP of sales who's not listening to their sales managers or sales directors, which I'm going to get to here in a minute, about what's going on out there, then they're not making the best decisions, and they're not being, they don't have the most up-to-date information, and they're kind of making decisions on Mount Olympus, as I call it. So you're not truly listening to who is out there and really knows what's going on, if that makes sense.
Sure. And one more listening-related question. I'm curious, in your opinion and your experience with the impact of, being in the world of, email and instant messaging and texting, I have to think that has an impact on listening, maybe in two ways. One is distraction, right? So let's say you're communicating to me, and I'm getting bombarded with different text and instant messaging, et cetera, and then my phone is vibrating, even though I set it to vibrate. And so that's one challenge, I would think, that we didn't have maybe 15 years ago. And the other is just the risk of misinterpreting, right? So I'm trying to listen to what you're saying in the email, and I read it a certain way. Maybe you're asking my opinion on something, but the way you wrote the email, I feel like maybe you're telling me to do something. Any thoughts on that?
Absolutely. In fact, it's part of what I'm going to talk about at the conference next week in Miami. Is part of my spiel is communication is key, and email. I love email. I live and die by email, and I think most people do. When email goes down, you kind of panic and think, oh my gosh, what am I going to do for the rest of the day? But it is really, really, really dangerous. And you nailed it with what you just said. It can be completely misinterpreted. I don't know the exact stat, but it's something around, and some of you out there may know this stat, it's something around 93% of communication is nonverbal. So email, IM, texting can completely be misconstrued. It's happened to me. You've heard about, well, your tone in that email was wrong, or led me to believe, or and yes, I truly believe that when something like that happens, the best course of action is to pick up the phone or see the person in person. Well, I mean, a lot of people, and I'm guilty of it, you get stuck in your office, and instead of getting up and walking 20 feet to ask somebody a question in the office, 5 doors down, you email them. And that's a very dangerous trap because of all the reasons you described, which I'm going to talk about a little bit in a couple slides coming up, but I am talking about that a lot more at the conference.
Great, thank you.
Confidence, you can get a lot of great quotes off the internet from people who have a ton of confidence, but you can also read about them too, which is what I've done most of my research has been reading. Great quote from Harry Truman, you can accomplish anything in life provided that you don't mind who gets the credit. That's a great quote because it's so, so true. It encompasses what a servant leader or a level 5 executive should think. If you're doing something because you want the credit, you really, truly aren't a servant leader. You may kind of secretly inside want the credit, but if your staff or people you've worked with, or if you're on a team and it's been a collaborative effort, a servant leader, especially if you're the leader of that team, will give the credit to their staff and their coworkers. If in fact you do that, I applaud you, because not a lot of people will do that. Give credit where credit is due, and if you have a strong team, even if you've put together that strong team, if they're doing the work, give them the credit. This is where that whole idea of it's not a meek or weak person who's a servant leader, it's a very confident person, because it's really easy to take credit for yourself. It can be really hard to give credit to somebody else when you really secretly want it. It's really easy to try to take it for yourself, and it takes a very strong, confident person to give that credit to others. FDR was a fabulous leader. He's also known as what's called a transformational leader. That's a completely different topic that I could talk on for hours. But he was a servant leader because he, again, wanted to serve his country. His country knew that he wanted to serve them, and they followed him. And his quote here, confidence thrives on honesty and honor, on the sacredness of obligations, on faithful protection and unselfish performance. Without them, it cannot live. So confidence is a big thing. The confidence, don't confuse confidence with ego. Ego on the other hand, some interesting quotes from Mr. Hitler. Who says I'm not under the special protection of God? That's really a very egotistical statement. Religious or not, that's just a very, it's an I statement, as I call it. If you tell a big enough lie and tell it frequently enough, it will be believed. That was his sole leadership philosophy. He told a lot of lies based on what he wanted to accomplish, because his driving force was his ego. Using ego, you're using the I statement a lot, instead of using we or they or us, which are the words you should be using. We accomplished that, they accomplished that, or we pulled together. There's a lot of phrases you can use that, as a servant leader, don't include the word I. So back to your ego and your listening skills. Here's just some tips. And again, some of these you may already do. This kind of goes to what Frank was asking earlier. And I practice this. I absolutely practice this. If I have a staff member come into my office, I turn away from my computer. I turn my cell phone, if it's not off, I'll turn it on vibrate, or I'll put it away so I can't see it. It's easy to get distracted, like Frank said, with a text message. Put away any mental distractions or preconceived judgments. So if somebody comes in who, for example, maybe they in the past have, it's going to be, they say they want 2 minutes and it's going to be 20. Put that away. It will show on your face if you have that preconceived notion, and it'll come out in your tone of voice. So put away those preconceived judgments, just any distractions, put them away, and then give that person your full attention. Take notes if you have questions rather than interrupting the speaker. Unlike today, I don't mind being interrupted, so Frank, please interrupt me if need be. But if somebody's in front of me and they have something they feel very, very important is on their mind, I will just jot down notes as I am thinking of them, or if they pop into my head, rather than interrupting and trying to get to my own agenda. Again, take time to process what you hear rather than reacting immediately. Don't let your first reaction be no. Let it be, is this possible, or do they just want you to listen? Some people just want to be heard, and they don't need something to be solved. And again, put your ego away. It just gets in the way of actively listening. Big egos have little ears. I just love that quote because it's so true. You kind of shut down when you let that get in the way. Active listening is just something that helps with every other servant leadership characteristic, like empathy, foresight, commitment to the growth of people. In fact, I don't even know if others can happen without the first. Like I said, when somebody comes into your office, stop typing. Turn away from your computer. Don't just keep typing something. Or if you need to finish a thought, like sometimes people come into my office and I'm in the middle of an email, I'll just ask them to give me just a second so I can finish what I'm doing. If your phone rings, try to ignore it. I know that's hard to do in this day and age, but try to. And again, give your staff your full attention when they need to speak with you, and that will help your listening skills a ton. Another characteristic I want to focus on for servant leadership is empathy. Empathy is another one of those things that people think, oh my goodness, that's it's going to show that I'm weak or I'm not a strong leader. And it's a necessary, very real part of servant leadership. There's some quotes here for you. People need to be accepted and recognized for their special and unique spirits. If you cannot empathize with your coworkers and subordinates, then you cannot truly understand how to work with them and form a cohesive team. Tenderness and kindness are not signs of weakness and despair, but manifestations of strength and resolution. And we have to go back to listening in order to be able to empathize. If you're not listening, you don't know the whole story, you're not going to be able to empathize. Being an empathetic listener strengthens relationships, and it can help others feel more comfortable and confident in sharing concerns and frustrations and ideas. It's not a weakness. On the contrary, it takes a very strong person to be able to show empathy. I remember one time I had a really good idea, or what I thought was a really good idea for marketing. I'm not in marketing. I'm in operations, but I've never been a marketer. But it was kind of a fun idea, I thought. And I remember taking it, this was a few years ago, I take it to my VP of marketing, who's no longer with the company. And I threw out the idea, and she just kind of laughed and made me feel very just like I should not have brought it up. I mean, it was like I was kind of the dumbest person in the world. And you can't really accept other people's ideas, even if inside you might think, oh, that's kind of silly and I probably shouldn't do that. Showing empathy would have been a stronger way for her to convey to me that maybe that wasn't the best idea. Or she didn't even have to say that at all. She could have just said, you know what, that's something to consider and thank you. Because I think sometimes people get stuck in thinking that nobody else other than people in their department know what's best. And in some cases that may be true, but sometimes great ideas can come from people who aren't closest to you. And you can really understand or get really good ideas from people if you understand where they're coming from, what kind of background they have. I mean, I would kind of challenge some people out there, how well do you know your coworkers and what their resumes look like? I mean, do you know what their schooling background is? Do you know if they have a degree in anything, if they have minors in anything? Some people have really creative minors that you might be able to, you know, tap into, or some internships that maybe you didn't know about. And you can really gather some great ideas, but you can't do that unless you really have some empathy for people and want to listen and learn more about them. And that includes when they come to you with issues. You still need to run your business. You still have a business to run, but don't get caught up in the old school mentality of, you know, Godfather thinking of it's not personal, it's just business. Business is personal. You don't have to make it so, you know, everybody's having holiday parties together, or you're going to kids, you know, each other's kids' birthday parties, but you still need to get to know each other on a personal level. And things happen, life happens, and you need to be able to let your staff know that you care. They will be more engaged if you show that. They will want to work harder for you because they'll know that you care about them as a person, and in the end, it will definitely pay off. So empathy goes right alongside with listening. Another key point is conceptualization. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this, but it does go hand in hand with foresight, which is another characteristic I want to talk to you about. Conceptualization is being able to see beyond day-to-day activities to what the future can and should look like. Martin Luther King Jr. is probably one of the best well-known for this because he was able to see beyond race and color lines to what the world should look like with regards to racism. Servant leaders are called to seek a delicate balance between conceptual thinking and day-to-day focused approach, from Larry Spears, who's, again, a leader in servant leadership research. This is really, really hard for some leaders to do because it involves listening, but it involves listening to your guests, your consumers, your customers, line-level employees, your investors, different management teams. That's a lot of people to listen to, and some people just can't get past having to do all that. The more you listen, though, the more you will learn, and you get a clearer picture of how to solve problems, where you want to go as an organization, and it can be really, really powerful. And then that leads right into foresight, and foresight is just that. It's kind of it's learning, listening, and repeating, as I call it. Instinct, experience, communication. Foresight is the characteristic that enables servant leaders to understand the lessons from the past, the realities of the present, and the likely consequences of a decision for a future. Foresight is both instinctual and learned. Listening and communication also play a huge role in leadership foresight. Foresight is something that people just can be naturally born with. It's like a strong intuition, but it's also very much learned from experience in life, definitely a work life. FDR was definitely a foresight person because he learned from his mistakes, and he wasn't afraid to say it. Honestly, Abraham Lincoln was also very, very good at that. He was able to listen and learn and make decisions and kind of have that foresight rather than looking at what's going to happen tomorrow or in the next hour. He was able to look ahead and think what was going to be best for the nation going on and on into decades and centuries. Foresight comes from combining all of the things that we've talked about: listening, listening to your team members, listening to your customers, if you are, you know, a CEO, or if you're a vice president, or you're a manager, or you're even a supervisor, you should be listening to everybody above you and everybody below you, right down to your customers, your anybody who works for you, line-level employees, because they're the closest to your customers. And then it's a circular thing. You listen, you learn, you gain foresight, you get some success, you get some rewards, and then you repeat the process. You keep listening, you keep learning. You cannot have foresight without listening. You don't have a crystal ball that I know of. I don't have one. If you have one, please send me one. But you can get pretty close if you listen well enough to the right people. As I said earlier, I referenced Mount Olympus. Don't live on Mount Olympus. Don't have a leadership team that sits up on high and never talks to line-level employees or people who are closest to your customers and your consumers, or the people that you are serving. Those are going to be the people who really understand. I'll give you my Central Res staff, for example. They talk to our customers first. They are the first point of contact for somebody booking a hotel room with Red Lion. And it's invaluable what I can learn from them, what the guests are asking for, what they're complaining about, what they are looking for, who they're giving recognition to. All those things can really, really help you as a brand, as an organization, or whatever business or industry you might be in. So if you do find that you are in an organization who has that kind of Mount Olympus mentality, and your CEO or your boss or whomever just kind of shouts orders from the top like Zeus, then make sure you try to change that. Try to listen to the mortals, as I say, and get some insight, and that will help you with your foresight and being able to make decisions for the future that you might not have thought of.
Julie, question if I may.
Sure.
With regard to foresight, two of the examples you gave were political leaders. And in a recent Forbes magazine that I was reading, the writer referred to, initially he referred to what in his opinion was a lack of political leadership ability in the U.S. And then he went beyond that to talk about the lack of political, what in his opinion were credible, viable political leaders kind of around the globe. Mm-hmm. So I guess my question is, if you think about the examples you gave, they were all folks that are not around anymore, right?
Yep.
So is
absolutely.
there any? Do you have any feelings as to are things changing? Are the days gone where there will be, just based on the new dynamic or a new environment? Is it tough for political leaders to truly have foresight, or are they just worried about the next election?
I think it's really difficult. Yeah, you're right on. I had chosen a couple of leaders. In fact, I'll even go back further with an example later in my presentation of a leader centuries ago. It's really, really difficult for political leaders because they are influenced so heavily by others. And without getting into a political discussion, you know, leaders, I would say that for the most part, you're going to have to look at CEOs and company leaders right now. And again, I go back to Good to Great. Jim Collins gives some great examples of leaders who are able to do all these things. They were able to do this and really have good, great companies. I think politicians they have it tough because they're influenced by so many others, and it's really hard for them. They might start out really, on this path, everything I've talked about, but then they're influenced so much by other forces that maybe, FDR and Abraham Lincoln and others didn't have. I think it's going to be really tough, and if we ever get another one, I think it would be phenomenal. But it's really hard. You could look at more recent. You could look at like Margaret Thatcher. She was a good one. She had some really, really good servant leadership traits. She cared for England, and she didn't let a whole lot of outside influence impact her, other than listening to the closest people to her that she knew would make good decisions for the country.
Okay.
But I think it's really difficult. I honestly don't know if I have a good answer for you, because I think it's really difficult for politicians in this day and age to do anything that's not completely influenced.
So let me shift to maybe an easier topic, but I'd like to, if I may, somewhat challenge your assertions about ego.
Mm-hmm.
So allow me to share with you kind of my philosophy, and then you could poke all the holes in it.
Mm-hmm.
The way I see it, I've often joked, and I mentioned this recently in a discussion with some of my colleagues here, that I believe, and this is just right here at the Outsourcing Institute, not necessarily within our member base, but we were just talking about business-related topics, and the topic of ego came up, and I mentioned that I felt that ego was kind of like cholesterol, right? Meaning there's good and bad cholesterol. I felt there's good and bad ego, and so if I think of, you could probably name a pretty long list of leaders that were driven by ego, and they've accomplished great things that have positive impact on many people. So that's the world according to me. What do you think? Does that hold any water or no?
No, I understand your point, absolutely. And I think it's all kind of the way you look at ego. If you're completely leading with your ego, you're gonna get in your own way. If you have an ego, that's okay. Just don't lead with it. Meaning you kind of keep your ego hidden, and it comes out more of, instead of coming out as being egotistical, it comes out as confidence, maybe a little bit of arrogance, but it doesn't come out as ego. I'm trying to think of an example to give you, but yes, there are a lot of people, and I'll even say I have a little bit of an ego. It happens, but I don't let that get in the way of being a leader and serving my staff. I'm okay with saying, man, I really messed up with that, or you know, I consider myself a good listener. I will listen to my staff, or you know, I will listen to customers. I often get customer complaints, and I have to listen to them. And I don't. My first reaction is not, oh my gosh, this person is psychotic, or this person is completely wrong, and I'm right, and that's the way it's going to be. You have to be able to open up your ears and say, okay, you know, open your ears and close your mouth, actually. But you have to be able to say, wow, I've never thought of it that way. And a person who leads with ego can't do that. It's almost impossible for somebody who has a big ego to say that they're wrong. And so I guess that's the distinction. I'm not saying that ego can't exist, because it does. It's impossible for it not to. It just it needs to come out in a different way.
Makes total sense. It's kind of like check your ego at the door. Doesn't mean eliminate it, but just keep it in check. Right.
Keep it in check, exactly.
Makes sense. Makes total sense. Thank you.
Yeah. In fact, if you don't have a little bit of an ego, it's hard to keep moving forward and keep growing as a person.
Right.
Thank you. That was a great question. Commitment to growth is the next characteristic I just want to touch on quickly. I know we're getting close to our Q&A time. The servant leader recognizes tremendous responsibility to do everything within his or her power to nurture the personal, professional, and spiritual growth of their employees. Vince Lombardi is a great example of somebody who is completely committed to the growth of his team and the organization. And actually, Frank, this is probably a really good example of somebody who had an ego but didn't lead with it.
Right.
I love this quote, confidence is contagious and so is lack of confidence. And Vince Lombardi was really good at making sure that his team, every single member of his team was confident. There's an interview that Stone Phillips did in 2004 with Larry Spears, and he talks about this idea that Vince was viewed as this tough coach, but he was a leader. But the question was he a servant leader? And Larry answered that yes, he was definitely a servant leader, and one of the biggest reasons was he inspired his players, and he helped them to grow, and he helped them to get better each and every day. And again, this just shows that servant leadership isn't about being weak. Vince Lombardi was probably one of the toughest people out there, but he had strength and he had confidence. And yes, he probably had an ego, and he had, you know, great teams. But he didn't lead with it, and he grew his people, and that was really, really important. He inspired and he motivated his staff. There's some great quotes by some of his former players. Jerry Kramer says he made us all better than we thought we could be. That's huge. If you can make your staff or somebody on your staff better than they ever thought they could be, you are definitely a servant leader. Coach Bart Starr says, Coach Lombardi showed me that by working hard and using my mind, I could overcome my weakness to the point where I could be one of the best. They call it coaching, but it's teaching. You do not just tell them, you show them the reasons. That's a quote by Vince Lombardi. Lombardi's players loved him. They hated him at times, but they loved him. He brought out the best in them. He helped them see how good they could be, and he never let them quit. He gave them reasons. He always gave them the why. He didn't just bark orders. He never said it's my way or the highway. He explained things. He coached them. He led them. He communicated all the time, and that's really what good servant leaders do. Really give the reasons why whenever possible. It's really, really important that when you're explaining something that you give the whys to it. You'll get better buy-in, and I think you'll get just more engagement from your staff. Now, there's certain things, like if you're a publicly traded company, you can't always give the reasons behind something. I've run into that a few times, or you can't give, exact details of why you give somebody something to do. But the more you can give somebody the whys, the more that they are going to buy into what you're doing. And just really doing all of these things that we've talked about, listening and empathizing and all those fun things, they really will help inspire and motivate your staff. They're going to want to do better for you, and they're going to learn how to be leaders themselves. Arlene, go ahead and go to the next slide. So here are a couple of those quotes I just talked about. And then if you want to go to the next one, we'll just talk about my last, this is going back a ways, Frank, so sorry, but she was amazing. Queen Elizabeth I was actually another one who, she had an ego. I will not deny that, because I've read a ton about her. But she didn't really let it get in her way. A couple times she did, but for the most part, she really listened. When she took over reign, she kept a few of the people who had been in her sister Mary's on her staff, so to speak, and then she also brought in some people of her own, and it really helped with buy-in. It really helped with that. Leaders who lead with their egos and simply tell people what to do are just not true leaders, and she didn't do that. So that's why I referenced her. She was actually great. There's a great book called Elizabeth I CEO, Strategic Lessons from a Leader Who Built an Empire, and she truly did. So it's a great book if you, and a quick read if you ever want to read it. But this is, servant leaders rely on those around them to make them better. They do this by serving them. They begin with the first characteristic of listening, and then they follow the rest of the characteristics. And again, it can be learned if you do certain things. Servant leaders actually lean on those who they hire and promote. They listen, they empathize, they do all of those things. Queen Elizabeth knew this, and she followed it. She surrounded herself by those who she trusted and can count on to help her make the best decisions for her people, as she called it, her England. And she was a very, very prosperous leader. So you can argue, yes, she had an ego, but she knew when to put it away. She knew when to check it at the door, and I think all great servant leaders know how to do that. So those are that's my spiel for today on servant leadership. There are some resources, but I referenced a couple of them if you want to get more information. Again, most of you have probably read Good to Great because it's been out there for a while, but there's some other servant leader books out there. And if there are any questions, great. Otherwise, I thank you all for your time.
Well, we have actually a handful of good questions here, so thank you. That was a great presentation, Julie. I appreciate that. I also want to make sure, and I didn't do a good job on the front end, I want to make sure I plug your presentation at the upcoming International Contact Center Summit, October 24th through 26th, and you'll be speaking there. Which day are you speaking, Julie? Is it the first or second?
Wednesday. I'm actually the closing keynote.
Okay. Alrighty. So, okay, a couple questions. Today's CEOs, okay, recent passing, Steve Jobs. How would you describe his style?
Without working for him personally, I could say I probably would have liked to. I think he absolutely fit the bill of good to great. So I would say he was absolutely a level 5 executive, if just first blush. Again, I didn't work for him. I don't know. but I think he's going to be one that's looked up to in years to come as somebody who was a very, very good leader, if not a great leader, because of what he built and how sustainable it was. But I think, going back to what really makes a great leader is now how will the company sustain itself. If the company kind of falls apart, I would contend that he didn't do a really good job of really keeping his, or having a backup plan, so to speak. But I don't think that's going to happen. I think he inspired and motivated and did a lot of Lombardi-type exercises with his staff and his management staff and his leadership staff, and I think that's going to be great. And I think it trickled down. I think he was one of those leaders that had such a philosophy and such a way of leading that it trickled down to just even line-level employees. So we'll see what happens, but I would say he's probably a good testament to it.
I'm curious. I'm curious how you see this leadership playing out in kind of this global economy, right? So there are many. It's one thing being a leader of, let's say, a local or regional organization, or maybe even a U.S.-based organization. So taking culture into consideration, any thoughts on the challenges of being a leader in, let's say, a multicultural organization?
Yeah, culture definitely plays a huge part in it, because you're going to run into you're going to run into a lot of different philosophies out there, and on what leadership is all about. And unfortunately, in this day and age, especially with what's happening in the Middle East, you run into religion. That's going to play a huge role in it too. It's unfortunate, but it is what it is. I mean, it is part of it. So culture will definitely plays a role. I think you can still apply it. I think people can. I think you can still accomplish being a servant leader in different countries and in different cultures. You just kind of have to respect the culture, if that makes sense.
Right.
And
ideally find a common thread, right? That works.
Yes, absolutely. I don't think anybody. Well, I don't know. I haven't worked in another country. I can't imagine a whole lot of people like to just be led around by the nose and not listen to you. I mean, otherwise, why would you interview people? You would just hire people to do your bidding. And I think there are so many strong economic countries out there, as well as weak ones, that you could probably find some really good servant leaders in other countries and other corporations. I mean, there's a ton out there. But I think if you look at some of the weaker countries and weaker organizations in other countries, you'll find either a complete lack of leadership, or you're going to find a lot of egos out there.
Okay, and maybe this is a good parting question. I was going to ask you for 3 recommendations, if you will, maybe words to the wise for those who want to improve their leadership ability. You recommended several books moments ago, so maybe reading is one. Could you name 2 other just practical, tactical things that those participating in this webinar could do?
I would say don't mimic what you don't like, would be one of them. So if you work for somebody who doesn't do the things or isn't a type of leader you want to be, certainly don't follow in their footsteps. So if you have a leader who doesn't listen to you, try to do the opposite. And yeah, there are definitely some great books out there, absolutely. There are all sorts of webinars, or even just classes you can take, little things like that, going to conferences and really looking at who else out there you can network with. Try to practice what you preach, so to speak, which is what I do. Sometimes it's hard. It's really hard to always be in listening mode when you have a job to do. I have 3 different departments that I run, and sometimes I get caught up in that, but at the end of the day, I have to stop and take a breather and think, okay, who am I working for, and who is working for me, and am I taking care of them? So kind of just take what you know and try to apply the good habits, and try to break the bad habits.
Okay. Well, that's great advice, Julia. Thank you for your time. It's your passion for this topic is apparent, and appreciate you investing the time to share with Outsourcing Institute members and others that have been able to join this webinar, share your insights, and hopefully as many people as possible get to see you at the conference. We also will be, as Arlene mentioned at the outset, we will be, we have recorded this webinar. We'll be posting it to outsourcing.com. If anyone wants to share this with any of their colleagues, it will be there. It will be accessible for free. And if you are here as an attendee, you will get a follow-up email with a link to that. Again, Julie, thank you so much for your time. And for those in attendance, have a great day. And if you get into the conference, enjoy the conference. Thank you.
Thank you.